Honor, did you want to make a record that you're allowing exhibits 46, 49, and 50?
Yes, we went back in chambers and I reviewed the photographs. I found that a number of them were cumulative. And so we restricted the number of photographs taken that will be shown to the jury. Great, please be seated. Okay, Mr. Larson, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Irish, you've previously testified about how you approached Mr. Wright's vehicle, and you testified that you saw Mr. Wright's body slumped. If you saw an image of his position, would you recognize it?
Yes, I would.
At this time, please show Exhibit 46. In Your Honor, the state offers Exhibit 46. I think, has the court received it?
Well, is there any objection to 46? Okay. Number 46 will be admitted over defense objection.
At this time, the state also offers Exhibits 49 and 50.
Okay, and I'm going to allow those exhibits as well over defense objections.
Thank you, Your Honor. You can now publish Exhibit 46. Could you zoom in? Officer Irish, could you describe what you see here on Exhibit 46?
Mr. Wright's body slumped over in the driver's seat.
And is that the position you recall him being in as you approached?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, as you can put that down, Mr. Miller, you've testified about the medical interventions that you and other officers administered to Mr. Wright. As you began that medical intervention, do you recall the number of officers that were surrounding Mr. Wright?
I don't.
Okay. Please put up Exhibit 49. I'm showing you Exhibit 49. Would you agree that this is an image of the lot of you who were attempting life-saving measures on Mr. Wright prior to the arrival of the paramedic?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in fact, if you look way on the right side of that image, do you see someone?
It appears to be the paramedic walking towards us.
And then, Mr. Miller, if you could show Exhibit 50. And what do you see in Exhibit 50, sir?
The paramedic attempting to locate a pulse.
Okay. And are you the individual whose head is immediately seen above the paramedic's head right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that was the position when you were administering the AED and other handling the breathing bag?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Take that exhibit down. Now you mentioned I believe you mentioned that you left the scene at approximately 2:48 p.m.
Around there, yes.
Roundabout. And you completed no further work on the case after that in terms of scene investigation.
That's correct.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Because
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Pauling on behalf of Kim Potter with Earl Gray and Amanda Montgomery, and as you know, we get to ask you questions too.
Yes, sir.
You have had a 19-year career with a lot of different assignments, correct?
Correct.
One of the assignments that you had was to work for the Anoka Hennepin County Drug Task Force, is that right?
That's correct.
And in so doing, you met Officer Potter's husband, Jeff, did you not?
I have, yes.
Okay. In fact, Jeff is right, the fellow in the suit, isn't that right? You know him.
Yes, I recognize him.
You have worked with him.
Sidebar, please. Allowing the answer to stand.
But in addition to being a member of the Drug Task Force, you're a patrol officer on for various cities in the northern suburbs, correct?
For the city of Corcoran, yes.
And Dayton.
Yeah, I resigned from there about 5 years ago.
Well, you were, on this day, you were delivering someone to the Hennepin County Jail on a warrant, is that right?
That's correct.
What you had done is arrest somebody, right?
Yes, sir.
Was it a traffic stop by chance, if you remember?
I don't recall what this...
Asking what a warrant is.
Okay. Is there an objection?
Relevancy?
The objection is overruled.
You had arrested someone on a warrant, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and a warrant is an order from the court authorizing you to make that arrest, right?
That's correct.
And when you have an arrest warrant for a body, you bring the body into jail, is that right?
On most warrants, correct.
Okay. So you were coming out of the Hennepin County Jail and you heard this dispatch, is that right?
That's correct.
For shots fired, right?
Yes, sir.
And you didn't know who fired the shot,
No, I did not.
but it really didn't make any difference to you as long as you heard something about a shot fired or shots fired, right?
That's correct.
I mean, so whether or not a police officer fires a shot or someone else fires a shot, you're going to put your lights on and go.
That's correct.
Okay. Without hesitation, right?
Yes, sir.
You knew where the scene was, of course, right?
Yes.
Okay. Could you hear Salvosa, Officer Salvosa, over the dispatch, or did you just have a dispatch saying shots were fired?
I believe it was a Brooklyn Center officer that said shots fired initially.
You can't tell us who that was.
I can't.
Okay. All right. But in any event, you got it took you about how long to get to the scene? 10 minutes? Would that be about right?
I would say less than 10 minutes.
Okay. And the first thing you saw were two cars which had collided. Is that right?
Yes, 2 crash cars.
And you've been around a lot of crashes in your career, right?
That's correct.
And you discerned, did you not, that the crash of these two vehicles occurred with a significant force?
Yes.
It was not just a fender bender.
No.
Okay. And the amount of force you know from your training is measured by the speed and the weight of the car involved. Is that correct? Those are the kind of the physics of it, right?
More or less, yes, sir.
I'm not telling you you're Einstein or anything, but the amount of damage, it depends on how heavy the car is and how fast it's going, right?
Yes, there was.
And you saw that this was one of the cars, whichever car had stopped caused this, was going at a significant speed in your experience, right?
Yes.
Okay. And when you arrived, you deferred to the judgment of the officer on the scene, that would be Officer Salvosa, as to what to do. Is that right?
No, I don't believe I ever conferred with him.
Well, was he, when you were at the scene and came on the scene, did he have his gun out and ordering the people out of the car, or the woman out of the car, or did you come after that, if you recall?
I came after that.
So you had come after the woman had been taken from the car or walked away from the car at about the same time that the bunker was used. Am I right about that?
That's correct.
Okay. And a bunker is a tactical device to protect police
Yes.
from errant shots, gunshots, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's a protective shield that will rebuff a bullet. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And at the time you were in the line with the bunker, the thought was, at least in your mind, is that this was still a very dangerous situation, right?
That's correct.
And one of the reasons why it was dangerous is that you knew that a car had fled the scene of some arrest, isn't that right?
I knew it fled the scene from something. I just knew there were shots fired.
Well, could you see the lights in the, about a block away, further to the west? Do you remember that at all, officer? I'm not saying you can or not.
No, I didn't focus my attention that way.
But the windows of the car were tinted.
That's
It
correct.
was difficult to see in.
Yes, sir.
That made it more dangerous for you.
Yes, sir.
And one of the most dangerous things you can do is open a car and not know what's inside.
That's correct.
So you moved in with the with the bunker and finally opened the door, is that right?
Moved in with the bunker and then moved around to the driver's side of the car.
And whether you opened the door or someone else opened the door opened.
Yes,
And Mr. Wright was taken out, is that right?
that's correct.
Okay. And do you know how long it was after Mr. Wright, had gotten to that point that you had taken him out of the car? Did you know that at the time? How many minutes had elapsed?
I did not.
So your job after that was to engage in life-saving efforts, is that right?
That's correct.
Non-judgmental life-saving efforts to figure out what happened, right?
That's correct.
And the protocols don't allow you to think too hard. You just got to act
Yes, and that comes from experience.
and apply the necessary equipment as you have it, right?
That's correct.
And there was one part of your testimony that I was a little confused about. You indicated there was some kind of signal coming from the heart that told you to continue, or you, one of your officers, to continue to do the CPR. Am I right about that? Or did I miss you on that? Help me with that.
From the AED, it said, no shock advised, continue CPR.
Okay. And that's what they did.
That's correct.
Okay. And it did not advise you to stop all efforts, right?
It did not.
And so you followed that direction, right?
That's correct.
And you did everything that you possibly could
That's correct.
to save his life,
Yes, sir.
which is your charge, right?
I'm sorry, what was
Which
it?
is your charge.
Yes.
I had a couple more questions. When you arrive at a scene, someone tries to be in charge, right? Someone is in charge at some point, right?
At some point, yes.
And it is kind of rank-based. For example, if you have a sergeant on the scene, the sergeant would be more in charge than the patrol officer. And I say that in no disrespect, but that's just the ranking of how this works. Am I right?
In most cases, yes.
So if you had a scene with 2 patrol officers and 1 sergeant, it would be fair for you to assume that the sergeant would eventually take control of the scene.
Yes, eventually.
That's the protocol too.
Generally, yes.
Okay, and make the calls to dispatch, make the necessary alerts on what's going on.
Yeah, some of the communications.
But it would go to the higher officer.
The communications?
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I can talk on my radio as I see fit.
But if the officer, I mean, if there are 2 officers on the scene and the third is a sergeant, the sergeant certainly has discretion to take control and make the dispatches. Correct?
Absolutely.
No further questions.
On cross-examination, Mr. Eng asked you whether, when you approached, the nature of the approach, was that a dangerous situation? Do you remember when he asked you that question?
Yes, sir.
Would you agree that the nature of their approach is sometimes based on what you don't know?
Yes.
Not that you knew there was danger, but that you didn't have information about what was afoot.
The objection is sustained.
Did you have information at the scene which allowed you to independently conclude that the scene was dangerous,
Yes, that there were shots fired.
that there was a shot fired?
Yes.
What about the individuals in the vehicle?
I didn't know anything about the individuals in the vehicle.
Mr. Ng asked you about sort of the advisories that the AED machine gives you. Could you list the advisories that the AED machine may give you when you hook it up and turn it on with an individual?
All AEDs are set up so that a lay person that's never used them can plug in the pads and start CPR. It tells you to place pads on patient. It tells you to keep your hands off patient while the machine's analyzing. It tells you that no shock is advised, continue CPR. It will also tell you stand clear from the patient. And you stand clear from the patient, make sure everyone's clear, and it'll tell you to deliver a shock. Those are most of the commands that I believe that an AED will give you.
Okay. So when the AED advised you to continue CPR, it was telling you that there wasn't a chargeable rhythm?
That there wasn't a shockable rhythm.
Shockable rhythm. And it isn't, let me clarify, is there any report that the AED would give you that it ain't even worth CPR?
The objection is sustained.
So again, you testified that it's stand clear or no shockable rhythm, continue CPR.
Yes.
No further questions.
Anything else?
What the machine does is help you make decisions and tells you what to do, which is helpful, right?
Yeah, but if I didn't have the machine, I would still make the decision to do CPR if I didn't have a pulse.
But it was helpful to have it, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the reason you use it.
That's correct.
Anything further? Okay. Thank you. You may sit down. Okay, the state may call its next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, the state calls Officer Jeff Sommers.
Hello, officer. Will you please come forward? And there is a chair next to me. Will you please stand next to the chair? And raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this cause?
I do.
Please have a seat. And officer, please remove your mask. State your full name and spell it.
Oh, sorry.
State your full name and spell it.
Oh, Jeffrey Allen Sommers, Jeffrey. Allen, Allen, Sommers, Sommers.
Couple of reminders. The court reporter is taking down everything that's being said. Answer with a yes or a no. Don't say uh-huh or uh-uh. Okay? If you don't understand a question, let the lawyer know. If an objection is made, stop talking immediately and don't answer the question unless I tell you to. And only one person can talk at a time. So wait until the question's finished before you start answering. Right? Counsel?
Could you state your occupation for the record?
I'm a police officer with Brooklyn Center Police.
It's a little difficult to hear. Yes.
Okay, sorry. Police officer with the City of Brooklyn Center.
Now, you began your career as a police officer in 2008, correct?
Correct.
And that was with the Anoka City Police Department?
Yes.
And then in 2010, you continued your law enforcement career with the Brooklyn Center Police Department.
Correct.
And have you been with Brooklyn Center ever since?
Yes.
And you're a licensed peace officer?
Yes.
And you take continuing education courses to maintain that license?
Yes.
I also want to note your military service. Could you tell the jury about your time as a Marine?
Yes. I did 4 years initial, then I joined the reserves and just retired back in March of this year, so I did 29 years.
Thank you for your service. Do you have a specific assignment within the Brooklyn Center Police Department?
Yes, I'm assigned to the patrol division.
Okay. And when you work patrol, are you equipped with body-worn camera?
I am.
And as a patrol officer, am I correct that you respond to 911 calls? You also do some directed patrol?
Yes, that's correct.
And as a patrol officer and as a Marine, am I correct that you have substantial emergency medical training?
Yes, I do.
And are you a certified first responder?
Yes.
And have you utilized your first responder training as a police officer?
Yes, I have.
During your career prior to April 11th of 2021, did you work with a fellow officer named Kim Potter?
Yes.
Describe how you know her.
We were assigned to the same shift for quite some time.
5 years?
At least 5, yes.
And have you interacted with Officer Potter outside of work?
Just on one occasion.
And if you saw her in person, would you recognize her?
Yes.
Is she in the courtroom?
The stipulation will be accepted.
Are you familiar with Sergeant Michael Johnson?
I am.
And how long have you known Sergeant Johnson?
Since I started at the Brooklyn Center Police Department.
Am I correct? He's been your patrol sergeant for 4 or 5 years as well?
Yes.
I want to discuss the events of April 11th, 2021 today. Do you recall that day?
I do.
And were you on duty that day?
I was.
What was your shift?
Started at 6 a.m. and was supposed to go to 6 p.m.
Okay. At 2 p.m., do you recall where you were?
I do.
Where were you?
I was in the report writing room at the police department.
Did you receive any communication from any fellow officers at that time that attracted your attention?
I initially heard a traffic stop called out by Officer Lucky, at which point he immediately asked for a second car.
Okay. Did you respond at that time, just to that information?
I didn't at that point because some other officers who were closer answered up.
Okay. Did you receive additional communication?
I did.
And what was that communication?
There was a shots fired.
Okay. Did you respond to a shots fired call?
I did.
Okay. And how did you respond?
Well, I ran to my squad car and activated my lights and sirens and went immediately there.
And as you were driving to the scene, did you get any updates as to what was going on?
I did.
And what were those updates?
The radio transmission came across that there was a vehicle had crashed and that Officer Salvosa stated that he was out of his car and had one at gunpoint.
As you were driving to the scene, what role did you anticipate playing at the scene?
At that point, I didn't know because all I know that there were shots fired and that there was a crash, so there's a lot of unknowns at that time.
And did you arrive in that area where Officer Salvosa was?
I did.
And would you agree that was the intersection of 63rd and Catherine?
Yes, it was.
How long did it take you to get there?
Probably 3 to 4 minutes, I'm guessing. I can't recall exactly.
As you arrived, was your body-worn camera activated?
It was.
And did it capture footage of your actions that day?
Yes.
Okay. Well, at this time, Your Honor, the state is going to offer Exhibit 54, Officer Sommers' body-worn camera, which captures his actions that upon arrival.
Is there any objection to Exhibit 54?
It is cumulative. It addresses the removal of Mr. Wright's body.
All right. The objection is overruled. You may show the video.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And 54 will be admitted.
And Officer Sommers, in lieu of asking you questions about your activities at that time, we're going to play the video. If I need to pause at some point to help the jury understand the video, I may do so. At this time, we'll play about a 14-minute body-worn camera excerpt. You can hit it, Mr. Miller, Exhibit 54.
Your incident has been updated.
Yeah. What's that? We got a bunker. We have a bunker. No.
We'll wait for a bunker. Get out of the car! Get out of the car so we can take care of it! Get out of the car! Yes, you! Get out of the car so we can help him!
She doesn't want to leave him.
Get out of the car! Let's grab a bunker if you got one. You got a bunker? Call her out over here, would you?
Call her. I got it.
Ma'am, put your hands up.
Yeah, he's back.
There's two more in it.
There's one in the back.
You got 40? All right. Let's have you guys come up from behind then. There's one still. He's not breathing.
All right.
I can't see the back seat. The back seat possibly has a passenger
And look.
moving around.
I see. And look, is there anybody in the back? It's hard to tell, huh?
I don't see anybody, no.
There's-
Just laying down.
Let's wait till they have one.
Yep.
I'm in no rush. Someone go check out that car and see if they're okay.
Which car? Oh, that. Turn your radio off, damn. Can't hear it.
What I do? Got one out of the car, still got two in there. Can't see what the one in the back did to it. I'll be right in. Stand back! Catherine, if we have a bunker.
2011 white Buick status expired.
We see one in the front passenger seat.
State records hit.
You guys want to come up from behind? You think so? All right, bring it around then. We can do it. We can bring it around.
Jesus, okay, it's fine.
You guys been seeing a guy in the back moving around?
No.
We just know it's a backseat passenger.
And I can't tell if that's a person or not. The female got out and I don't know what she said. So. Hey, Al, is there another person in the back or no?
No, no. It's just the driver right now that we. Yeah, that's all I can see.
Okay. She didn't say there was anyone else?
She doesn't say there's anyone else. I couldn't really see because she was moving around so much.
All right.
You guys all good now?
Yeah.
Santa County PD. Be there in about 1 minute. I don't see anybody moving back there.
No.
You just fan out.
White Buick plate status expired. 1 state records hit.
Here, I got it. I got it.
Yeah, let's get up, med kit.
Hey, Al, grab a bag.
Med bag, I'll grab the bag. Sure to get breathing or no?
I'm going to show you where he's hit.
Yeah. Here. Scissors, we got scissors.
We don't have exit, do we? No.
Where's he got the shot?
Right there in the chest. Got a bandage on there? Oh. There you go. What's that?
No one else can.
We've played the video a number of minutes. Let's take a breath for a second. Officer Sommers, would you agree that, let me ask again, could you describe the first 6 minutes of the video we've just seen? Do those describe your actions at the scene that day?
Yes. So when we got there, while I was en route, like I said, that we got word that the vehicle had crashed. So as I got there, I saw Officer Salvosa's squad car, and he was outside of his vehicle with his gun drawn, and I parked directly to the side and behind him, and then made my way up to his car. And at that point, like I said, there was a lot of unknowns. All we knew that was shots were fired. We don't know by who. We didn't know who had firearms at that point, or anybody had been hit at that point either. So that's why it took us a while to get up there and clear the car, because they wanted to get a bunker there. So we had to assume that there may have been a firearm in the car. That's why there was those precautions were taken.
Right. The video also showed pardon me, do you know the identity of the individual who was pulled from the car eventually?
Eventually, yes.
And was that person identified as Daunte Wright?
Yes.
Okay. And the portion of the video we just saw was Mr. Wright being taken out of that vehicle and placed on the ground?
Yes,
And you participated in the life-saving measures at that point, correct?
I did.
Okay. And right as I paused this video at 2:12 and 7 seconds, it appeared that you were digging into a bag. Could you describe what you were looking for in that bag, and then we'll hit play again?
Yes, that's the medical bag. It's got various first aid equipment. It's got oxygen tank. I was looking for the bag valve mask, it's called. It's what you use to help the party breathe.
Okay.
And then I was also looking for an airway, too.
Okay. And an airway just makes sure that pathway is...
It opens up so you can get air into the lungs.
Thank you. You can hit play again, Mr.
I got a clear dressing. Clear dressing?
He doesn't have an exit.
Yes, please. Gotcha. So, hold on, I'm going to keep the gun.
Yeah, I did.
We don't have any. Is North cleared to come in yet? Oh.
Where's that AD?
Here's it. You guys want an airway? I'll get the air going. All with the...
We need to move. Yeah, north. Is this the only one?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe in it. Just want to back out and get him on the road.
No shock advice.
Was he responsive to you guys?
No.
We just pulled him out of the car like 3 minutes ago. He was in the back. He was like this the whole time. Yeah. Yeah, why don't you keep me here for a sec? We'll get the monitor on him. I'm thinking-
Sidebar. Objection is sustained. This is very cumulative. I'll allow you to finish up with a testimony concerning what this witness did, but we don't need to show any more video.
Officer Sommers, we stopped that video as the paramedics arrived. Could you describe what occurred after that moment?
Well, I got the oxygen hooked up, started administering the breaths, and they began chest compressions. Oh, I said that I started administering the oxygen, and then chest compressions had begun.
Ultimately, as those efforts continued, did the paramedics assess whether there was any chargeable pulse?
They did.
And ultimately, did the paramedics pronounce Mr. Wright dead?
Yes.
After the paramedics pronounced Mr. Wright dead, what did they do?
The paramedics cleared the scene, I believe.
Pardon me, what did you do?
Oh, what did I do? At that point, I grabbed the oxygen bag, loaded it back into the back of the vehicle that it came from, and at that point, I believe Officer Salvosa and I were tasked to stay with the mother and father who arrived on scene.
Okay. Prior to speaking to the mother and father of Mr. Wright, were you told any information about what happened that led to his death?
No.
So, when you spoke to, at some point, someone came to the scene. You identified them as Mr. Wright's parents? Is that
Correct.
And you and Officer Salvosa spoke to them?
I was just there to back up Officer Salvosa. He did the speaking.
And am I correct that at some point, Officer Salvosa actually left the presence of the parents?
Yes,
Did you remain with them?
I did.
How long did you remain with them?
It was somewhere around an hour, I believe.
And what were you doing when you were next to them?
I was just tasked with trying to keep them out of the scene there, crossing the tape.
After you concluded speaking to Mr. Wright's parents, what did you do at the scene?
I was told to go down to the far western end.
And what did you do when you got there?
Initially, I looked for a shell casing.
Did you find a shell casing?
I did not.
What did you do after you gave up looking for a shell casing?
At that point, I was put in charge of keeping people out coming in that way from the west.
Okay. Essentially, you did scene security.
Scene security, yes.
From not the end of 63rd where Mr. Wright's parents were, but the other.
Correct.
And how long did you provide scene security?
That was for a number of hours, actually. I don't recall how many, but it was quite a while.
Do you recall whether any other agencies came to that location while you were conducting scene security?
There was several.
What other agencies came?
I believe it was Crystal and Brooklyn Park.
I'm sorry. Did the BCA come?
They did eventually, yes.
Did the Hennepin County Medical Examiner come?
Yes.
Did you have any direct interaction with anyone from the BCA?
Just limited words. I just told them that I had looked for a shell casing and couldn't find one.
Okay. Do you know who from the Brooklyn Center Police Department had interaction with members of the BCA?
Specifically, no.
Now, we've seen some of your body-worn camera video here in court today, and you've talked a little bit about what you did at the scene. In addition to those tasks and assisting with security, did you do anything else regarding this case?
At the scene there? Or, yes, initially part of the, it's called the West Metro Mobile Field Force. So I had to go leave the scene, get my gear, and then come return to the scene.
Continuing to provide security.
Correct.
Yep. How about with regard to collection of any evidence?
No, I didn't collect any evidence.
Interview any witnesses?
No,
Write any reports?
no,
Speak to anyone else about the incident?
no,
Okay, and you did not witness any of the events which caused Mr. Wright's death?
I did not.
No further questions.
Do you have cross? Yes.
Would you like to be heard in earphones?
Sure. Okay. You may step down.
Thank you.
Okay, the objection is granted in part and denied in part. The state may call its next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Mike Morleock.
Okay, please come forward. And will you please stand behind the chair, the witness chair? And raise your right hand. Do you swear under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully testify in connection with this cause? I swear. Please take the witness chair and remove your mask and state your full name for the record.
Michael Henry Morleock.
And will you please spell it?
Spell it? My last name Morleock is Morrelock. The first name is Michael, Michael. The middle name is Henry, Henry.
All right, the rules of to testify are that you have to answer with a yes or a no instead of shaking your head. Because the court reporter is taking things down, don't say uh-huh and uh-uh. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification. If an objection is made, stop talking. Don't answer the question unless I tell you to. All right? And only one person can talk at a time, so wait until the question's finished before you answer.
Understood.
Okay. Counsel? Oh, yes.
I was going to ask that. Do I need to be closer?
Yes.
Is that
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Morleock.
better? Afternoon.
Could you tell the jury where you work, please?
I work for North Memorial Ambulance in our Metro Division, which is covering northern Hennepin County.
What is your job title?
My job title is Ambulance Operations Supervisor.
And how long have you been in the position as a supervisor?
About 3.5 years.
And did you have another role before that?
I was a paramedic with North Memorial as just a regular street paramedic for 911 calls, a field training officer, and for a period of time of maybe about 2 years before I was a supervisor, I worked as a flight paramedic on a helicopter.
And are you licensed and certified as a paramedic?
Yes.
Could you describe your general duties as a supervisor with North Memorial?
There are administrative duties and operational duties. So the administrative duties involve disciplinary actions, paperwork, making sure that employees have their certifications available, that they have everything they need, that they have the tools that they need. And there are operational considerations. Do we have ambulances available? Are the right crews in the right spot? We also are expected to go on scenes like the incident that we're discussing today, where there are multiple casualties. The goal being to better regulate the resources that we have and send them in the right direction, send them to the right spot.
So is part of your job then to direct other paramedics where to go and what to do?
Correct.
I'm going to direct your attention to April 11th of this year. Were you on duty as a supervisor with North Memorial EMS on that date?
Yes.
And did you respond to a call?
Yes.
And what was the nature of the call?
We received the call as a shooting, so it initially got called as a single shooting, and then briefly after that we were updated that there were 3 people shot.
So the information that you got from your dispatch was that 3 people were shot?
Correct.
Is the information you get from dispatch always accurate, or is it the best information at the time?
It is not always accurate, no.
But the information you were aware of was that there may be multiple shooting victims at the scene you were going to. Is that right?
Correct.
She repeats his testimony. She's done it twice now.
All right, Counsel, if you could just refrain from doing that.
Certainly, Your Honor.
All right.
Where did you respond on April 11th?
I don't remember the cross street. It was somewhere on 63rd Avenue in Brooklyn Center.
And what did you see when you arrived? Where was this a particular location you were dispatched to?
Yes, we were given a cross street. It was 63rd and some avenue on that street. So I was approaching from the west, so I was facing east on 63rd. And when I approached, I saw a number of vehicles there, a number of police in the area. And there was what appeared to be a line of police approaching a vehicle with rifles drawn and pointed towards the vehicle.
And what did you do at that point?
So we normally get called to the area on calls like this when we don't know if there's danger, and we wait for the police to clear us in. Since we were already heading to the area, I stopped at that point and waited for some sort of signal that we could approach safely.
When you say we, were you by yourself or were you with others?
So I had somebody in the vehicle with me that I brought from the garage, knowing that if there were 3 people shot, that we would need as many resources as possible. Shortly, like not far behind me, there was at least 1 ambulance.
And you said that you were waiting for the all clear. Did you eventually get an all clear?
We got a signal, I believe, from a police officer down near the scene that made some sort of signal to come forward. And then shortly after that, as I was walking up, we got radioed in that we were code 4, which is the signal that the scene is safe.
And when you say code 4, is that the meaning of that code?
Correct.
So did you approach where you had been signaled to by the officers?
I did, yeah.
And what did you see when you arrived there?
So as I approached, I saw a young woman being escorted out of the car towards a squad car. Shortly after that, I was made aware of a number of police officers around a body on the grass, and they were doing compressions, so CPR. At that point, that's where I drew my attention, and I headed in that direction.
To the individual who was receiving CPR, is that right?
Correct.
And what did you do once you approached that individual?
So I wanted to confirm that the CPR was necessary, so trying to feel for a pulse and determine whether or not they needed to continue compressions, and trying to get as much information as I could to hand off the patient to the crew that followed shortly after me.
And did you then check for a pulse?
I did.
And how did you do that?
I checked on the right side of his neck, the right carotid, for trying about 10 seconds. And then I checked on the left side as well for 5 to 10 seconds.
Were you able to detect a pulse?
I was not.
Your Honor, I would just ask that we put up Exhibit 50, which I believe has already been admitted. Your Honor, this exhibit is in evidence, and this witness would be able to identify himself as long as we can turn on the screen.
All right. I think I want this taken down. The jury has already seen this photograph. And I indicated before that I wanted only the testimony of anything that wasn't cumulative
Your Honor, you
PD.
indicated no video. We have no plans to show video, but this was a photograph that identifies
Okay.
this witness.
Well, I don't want that photograph shown again. The jury has already seen it.
All right. I'll move on, Your Honor. You checked for a pulse. Is that right?
Correct.
And you said that you were not able to detect a pulse. What else did you observe about the patient?
I observed that he did not appear to be breathing. I also tried to watch as I was approaching that as the police officers were ventilating him with the BVM, which is the device that we use to ventilate patients, that air was going in and out of his lungs. I looked at his skin color, condition, general things for basic assessments as we approach.
And what did you notice about the color and feel of his skin?
His skin was fairly dry. He was pale or ashen colored on his skin and in his mucous membranes.
And what does the coloration and the feeling of dryness indicate to you as a paramedic?
So the skin color can tell us whether or not he's perfusing blood throughout his body. The pink color is blood being moved around his body. The dryness or wetness of his skin can tell us either that it's a cold day out and that it evaporated, or that he is no longer perfusing and no longer compensating for a low blood pressure, for instance.
And does lack of perspiration indicate the same sort of thing to you in that way?
It can, yes.
Okay. So as you approached and checked pulses, were the officers around you already working on the body?
Yes.
And what did you learn from them, and what did you see was happening at that time?
So what I learned from them initially was that the AED that they had applied had not recommended that it deliver electricity, did not recommend that it shock the patient.
And what does that mean to you?
It means that the AED didn't recognize a shockable rhythm.
Was there an indication of PEA?
At the time that I initially approached, I'm not able to determine that. We have to put an ECG monitor on.
Okay. But you were advised that there was no shock advised, is that right?
Correct.
So did you observe any injuries at that point?
I did see either an entrance or exit wound on the right side of the patient's body, a gunshot wound.
And did you see injuries consistent with death?
Those injuries could be consistent with death, yes.
But when you approached and you saw these conditions, what did you direct? Well, let me stop there. Were there other paramedics who also arrived on scene shortly after you?
Yes.
Did you give them some direction?
So I initially directed the police to continue compressions until the paramedics could get there and do a more thorough assessment. When the paramedics behind me arrived, I told them that I could not feel a pulse, that the AED had not recommended delivering electricity, and that I had told the police to continue doing compressions.
Did you then hand over the paramedic side of things to the team that had arrived?
Correct.
And who were those individuals?
Dustin Johnson and Chelsea Corder.
And what did you do at that point when you sort of transferred management of the patient to these other two?
So my job at that point is to determine how many patients we have at the scene, what the extent of injuries are, determine if we need any more resources.
Were you able to did you get any more information at that point?
I did have difficulty initially trying to figure out exactly how many patients we are, what the nature of their injuries are, and what the extent of those injuries were.
So at that point, were you still looking for more patients?
Correct.
After you handed off the, primary care role of the patient who was receiving CPR to your other paramedics, did they consult with you about what they were doing and what to do with respect to that patient?
I don't believe that they consulted with me until the very last conversation that we had before we had ceased resuscitations.
Okay, and maybe you could tell the jury when we talk about what that last conversation was there a conversation that you had with these individuals about declaring death of that patient?
Yes.
And was that patient later identified to you as Daunte Wright?
Yes.
So in terms of declaring the death of Daunte Wright. Was that done at approximately 2:18 p.m.?
That was the estimate that I arrived at, yes.
And tell the jury about how and why it was that you came to conclude that you would be able to declare Mr. Wright dead.
So our protocols, written by our medical directors, are derived from evidence-based practice. And in the case of traumatic cardiac arrest, so car accidents, shootings, stabbings, when we arrive on a scene and an individual does not have a pulse, the likelihood of resuscitating those patients are very, very low. So our protocols do give us the option of ceasing resuscitation if we arrive on the scene and the patient does not have a pulse and no shockable rhythm.
And were those the conditions that you observed and your team worked on with respect to Mr. Wright that day?
Yes.
And so when you declared Mr. Wright dead at approximately 2:18 p.m., did that just mean that you decided to stop working on him at that point, meaning stop performing the efforts that you were?
Correct.
Does that mean anything about the time his heart actually stopped beating or the time he actually passed away?
That's correct. It does not have any relation to when his heart actually stopped beating.
And after you declared Mr. Wright dead, did you continue to direct other paramedics to do further work at the scene?
Different paramedics than Dustin and Chelsea?
Were there other rigs that arrived?
Yes.
And how many rigs in total, if you recall, arrived on that scene?
3, I believe.
So you indicated that Dustin Johnson and Chelsea Corder had been working on Mr. Wright. Did you direct an additional rig or additional set of paramedics to attend to occupants of another vehicle?
Yes,
And did they do that?
they did.
And at some point, did you direct Dustin Johnson to another individual who had been an occupant of a vehicle?
Yes.
And it was Dustin Johnson who was responsible for rendering care in that situation?
Both of them are responsible for rendering care, but I believe he was the initial one giving care to that person.
And he would have then worked with his partner, Chelsea Corder, is that right?
Correct.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Ms. Lane-Cross.
We have no question.
All right, thank you. You may step down.
Ron, can we make another record?
Just a second. All right, members of the jury, we're going to take another 15-minute break, okay? So I know it's getting to be a long day and it's near the end of the week, so 15 minutes. See everyone in chambers. And are you waiving Ms. Potter's appearance in chambers?
We waive her appearance.
Okay.
Judge, may I go to the bathroom first?
No. Yes, you can. All right, we'll see you later.